A desperate waitress ran after a customer who forgot his wallet, unaware he was a secret billionaire who would change her life forever. You have 24 hours to pay, or you and that sick child of yours are out on the street. The pounding rain hammered against the thin glass of the diner window, a relentless percussion that matched the frantic thudding in Alara's chest. Each drop that splattered and slid down the pane felt like another worry, another bill, another reminder of how fragile her world had become. She watched the gray, waterlogged city blur into a watercolor of sorrow, her own reflection a pale, hollow ghost superimposed over the chaos. Her worn waitress uniform, the fabric thin and faded from 100 washings, felt like a second skin of servitude, a constant reminder of her place in a world that had taken everything from her. The stale air of the diner, thick with the smell of cheap coffee and frying grease, did little to warm the biting cold that had settled deep in her bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. It was the cold of fear. She was alone. The harsh words from her landlord still echoed in her ears, each syllable a sharpened shard of ice. 24 hours. It was an impossible deadline, a cruel joke played by a universe that seemed to delight in her suffering. Her son, Leo, with his innocent, trusting eyes and a cough that never quite went away, was the only light in her shattered life. His medical bills were a mountain of paper on her small kitchen table, a monument to her failure. She had been a good wife, a loving mother, and now she was just this, a widow, a debtor, a woman trembling on the precipice of homelessness. Her husband, Mark, had been her rock, his quiet strength the foundation of their small, happy world. But a sudden, brutal illness had splintered that foundation, leaving behind only memories that shimmered like heat haze and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on her soul. Now, every clatter of a plate, every forced smile to a customer, every meager tip dropped into her trembling hand was a desperate scrabble against the inevitable. She was sinking. A man sat alone in the corner booth, a solitary figure shrouded in the flickering light of the old neon sign outside. He hadn't said much, just ordered a black coffee and stared out at the rain with haunted, weary eyes that seemed to hold the same storm that raged outside. He looked ordinary, forgettable, dressed in a simple, well-worn jacket that spoke of a life of quiet hardship, not unlike her own. There was a profound sadness about him, a stillness that was more than just calm. It was the heavy stillness of loss. Alara felt a strange, unspoken kinship with him, a recognition of the same invisible wounds she carried. She refilled his cup, her movements steady and gentle despite the tremor in her hands. He offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod of thanks, his gaze distant, lost in a world she could not see. He was just another lost soul seeking temporary shelter from the storm. He paid in cash, leaving a modest but fair tip, and slipped out into the deluge as quietly as he had arrived. His departure was unremarkable. It was only when she went to clear his table that she saw it. A dark leather wallet, thick and heavy, sat on the vinyl seat. Her heart gave a violent lurch, a painful thud against her ribs. For a seismic, shameful second, a thought flashed through her mind. A dark, desperate whisper. The rent. Leo's medicine. A way out. The wallet felt impossibly heavy in her hand. A concentration of fate. She could solve her problems right here, right now. No one would ever know. The man was a stranger, a ghost who had drifted in and out of the rain. But then, the image of Leo's face, his pure and unwavering trust in her, rose in her mind. She saw her husband's kind eyes, the memory of his integrity a sacred flame she had sworn to keep alive. The thought vanished, extinguished by a goodness so deeply ingrained it was part of her very being. This was not who she was. She would not let desperation corrupt the one thing she had left, her dignity. Without a second thought, she untied her apron, tossing it onto the counter. "I'll be right back," she called out to her coworker, her voice tight. She didn't wait for a response. She burst through the diner door, the bell jangling wildly behind her. The biting cold of the rain was a shock, a physical blow that soaked her thin uniform in an instant. The wind tore at her, whipping her hair across her face as she scanned the crowded, rain-slicked street. She saw him, a block away, a solitary figure about to turn a corner and vanish forever. "Sir!" she cried out, her voice thin against the roar of the storm. "Wait! You forgot something!" She started to run, her worn shoes slipping on the wet pavement. The wallet was clutched in her hand, a testament to a choice made in a heartbeat. She didn't know it yet, but she was not just running after a stranger. She was running toward her salvation. He didn't hear her at first, his head down against the onslaught of wind and water. The city lights smeared across the wet asphalt, a river of fractured color. Alara pushed herself harder, her lungs burning, the icy rain stinging her cheeks like 1,000 tiny needles. "Sir, please!" she yelled again, her voice cracking with the effort. This time he stopped. He turned slowly, his expression one of confusion, his weary eyes squinting through the downpour. He saw her then, a soaked, desperate figure running towards him, holding something out. She finally reached him, gasping for breath, her chest heaving. Rain dripped from the end of her nose and plastered her hair to her forehead, but her eyes were clear and unwavering. "Your wallet," she panted, holding it out to him. "You left it at the diner." Alistair stared at her, then at the wallet in her hand, a wave of disbelief washing over him. He hadn't even realized it was gone. His mind, so often lost in the heavy fog of grief, had become careless with such trivial things. He reached into his jacket pocket, the empty space confirming her words. He looked back at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the threadbare uniform clinging to her soaked frame, the exhaustion etched into the fine lines around her eyes, the raw vulnerability in her expression. And yet, there was an undeniable strength there, a quiet, dignified light that the storm could not extinguish. He knew, with the instinct of a man who dealt with people who wanted something from him every single day, that she had been in a position of power. That wallet contained more cash than she likely saw in a month, along with credit cards that had no limit. She could have vanished with it, and he would have merely called his assistant to cancel everything. Another minor inconvenience in a life devoid of meaning. But she hadn't. She had run into a storm for him. For a stranger. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. The words felt inadequate, hollow. He took the wallet, his fingers brushing against hers. Her hand was trembling, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. He opened the wallet not to check the contents, but to pull out the cash. All of it. It was several $100s. "Here," he said, trying to press the wad of crisp bills into her hand. "Please." "For your trouble," Alara recoiled as if burned, her pale face flushing. She shook her head fiercely, taking a step back. "No," she said, her voice firm despite her shivering. "I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Her sincerity was a physical force, a blow to his cynical, guarded heart. In his world, every action was transactional, every kindness a down payment on a future request. Her selfless act was an anomaly, a flower blooming on a battlefield. It was pure. The sound of the hammering rain filled the space between them. For the first time in 2 years, since the sterile silence of the hospital room where his wife, Lily, had taken her last breath, Alistair felt something other than the dull, persistent ache of loss. It was a flicker of warmth, a spark of awe. This woman, who clearly had so little, possessed a wealth of character he hadn't seen in years. He saw a flicker of Lily in her unwavering integrity, in her gentle strength. He had to know her name. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Alara," she replied, hugging her arms around herself against the biting cold. Alara Vance. He committed the name to memory, etching it into his mind. This moment, he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, was important. It was a sign, turning point. He didn't know how, but he knew this was not the end of their story. He had to go. A car was waiting, but he watched her turn and walk back toward the distant, warm glow of the diner, a fragile figure battling the storm. He stood there for a long moment, the rain soaking his expensive coat, feeling the profound, seismic shift within him. A sob caught in his throat. When Alara finally stumbled back into the diner, dripping a puddle onto the checkered linoleum floor, her boss, Mr. Henderson, was waiting. His arms were crossed over his portly chest, his face a mask of impatience and fury. He was a man whose small authority was his only joy, and he wielded it like a cudgel. "Where have you been, Vance?" he snapped, his voice echoing in the half-empty room. "Leaving your post, running out on customers. What do you have to say for yourself?" Alara shivered, trying to catch her breath. "A customer? He forgot his wallet," she explained, her voice trembling slightly. "I had to return it." Mr. Henderson let out a derisive snort. "You had to return it? Your job is in here, serving my customers, making me money, not chasing after every forgetful fool who walks out that door. You were gone for 10 minutes. 10 minutes I'm paying you for nothing." The injustice of it stung more than the cold. She looked at him, her eyes pleading for a scrap of understanding. "It was the right thing to do, Mr. Henderson." His face hardened, his eyes narrowing into cruel slits. He saw her desperation, her vulnerability, and he saw it as a weakness to be exploited, to be crushed. "The right thing to do is your job," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "I've had enough of your moping, your constant sadness. It's bad for business. You're fired. Get your things and get out." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Fired. The words splintered the fragile hope she had been clinging to. She felt the floor drop out from beneath her, the roar of the storm outside suddenly muted by the roar of panic in her ears. She opened her mouth to protest, to beg, but no sound came out. A sharp gasp was all she could manage. All she could see was Leo's face, the landlord's sneer. Total silence. She walked home in a daze, the rain having softened to a miserable, persistent drizzle. She had forgotten her thin coat at the diner, and the wet uniform clung to her skin, leaching away what little warmth she had left. The world seemed to have lost its color, everything painted in shades of gray and despair. Each step was heavy, an effort of will. The brief warmth she had felt from her small act of kindness had been utterly extinguished, replaced by the familiar, biting cold of hopelessness. She had tried to do the right thing, and she had been punished for it. The universe was not just indifferent. It was cruel. She reached her apartment building, the brick facade streaked with grime, and climbed the 3 flights of stairs, her legs aching. The door to her apartment opened with a soft click, revealing the small, threadbare space she and Leo called home. Inside, the air was still and quiet. Leo was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a worn, patched blanket, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. A single, flickering lamp cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the stacks of unpaid bills on the table. A sob finally escaped her, a raw, ragged sound torn from the depths of her soul. She sank to her knees, her body trembling with a grief so immense it threatened to consume her. She had failed. She had failed her son, failed the memory of her husband. She pressed her forehead against the cool, worn fabric of the couch, muffling her cries so as not to wake the only innocent soul in her shattered world. She felt utterly and completely alone, a tiny boat tossed on a merciless sea, with no land in sight. She had hit rock bottom. She was gone. Meanwhile, across the city, Alistair Sterling sat in the back of his sleek, black car, the city lights sliding past the tinted windows like scattered jewels. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside him was just beginning to calm, replaced by a new, unfamiliar feeling: purpose. He held his phone, the screen illuminating his commanding features in the dim light. "I have a name," he said, his voice quiet but firm, to the man on the other end of the line. "Alara Vance. I want you to find out everything about her. Where she lives, her situation, everything. Be discreet. I don't want her to know she's being watched." He listened for a moment, his expression unreadable. "No, she's not in any trouble. Quite the opposite. Just do it." He hung up, the silence in the cavernous vehicle amplifying the steady beat of his own heart. He looked down at the wallet in his hands, opening it to a hidden flap. Inside was a small, faded photograph of a woman with a radiant smile and eyes that sparkled with life. "Lily, I think I found one," he whispered to the photograph. "A truly good person. Just like you." He didn't know the full extent of Alara's suffering yet, but he had seen enough. He had seen her virtue, and in his world, that was a currency more valuable than all his billions. He would not let it go unrewarded. A quiet resolve settled over him. He would be her hidden savior. Over the next few days, a series of small miracles began to unfold in Alara's life. She woke one morning to find a large box of groceries on her doorstep, filled with fresh fruit, vegetables, and Leo's favorite snacks. There was no note, no indication of who had left it. She dismissed it as a mistake, a delivery for another apartment, but a deep, unbidden flicker of hope ignited within her. The next day, an envelope was slipped under her door. Inside was enough cash to cover her rent for the next 3 months. It was tucked inside a plain white envelope, with no return address, just the word kindness written in simple block letters on a small slip of paper. Alara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She sank onto the floor, the crisp bills fanning out around her, tears of disbelief and relief streaming down her face. It felt like a dream, a fantasy spun from desperation. The greatest miracle, however, came in the form of a phone call. It was from the city's most prestigious pediatric clinic. A Dr. Eris, a renowned specialist in childhood respiratory illnesses, had an unexpected opening. An anonymous benefactor had not only scheduled an appointment for Leo but had also established a fund to cover all of his medical expenses. Indefinitely. Alara's knees went weak. She had to sit down, the phone clutched in her trembling hand. She listened to the receptionist explain the details, her mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. It was too much, too impossible. Who would do this? Why? The only clue was the word on the slip of paper. Kindness. Her mind replayed the scene in the rain, the haunted eyes of the man with the wallet. Could it be him? The idea was preposterous. He was just an ordinary man. And yet, the memory of his intense gaze, the way he had looked at her, lingered. She didn't know it, but from a discreet car parked down the street, Alistair watched the light in her apartment window, a soft smile touching his lips for the first time in years. He was not just repaying a debt. He was investing in hope. He was healing himself. With the immediate threat of homelessness and medical debt lifted, a fragile sense of peace began to settle over Alara. She devoted her days to Leo, taking him to his appointments with Dr. Eris, who was kind and optimistic about his prognosis. One sunny afternoon, she took Leo to a large, beautiful park near the clinic, a place she had never been able to afford the time to visit before. The golden glow of the sun filtered through the leaves of the towering oak trees, and the sound of children's laughter echoed in the air. As Leo played on the swings, his own laughter clear and bright, Alara sat on a bench, a real, genuine smile gracing her lips. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she had thought was lost to her forever. Hope. Is this seat taken? A quiet voice asked. She looked up and froze. It was him, the man from the diner. He looked different in the daylight, less haunted, though the sadness still lingered deep in his eyes. He was dressed in simple, clean clothes, jeans and a crisp shirt, nothing that would suggest immense wealth. He was just a man. No, she stammered, her heart beginning to pound. Please, he sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. He watched Leo on the swing for a moment, a wistful expression on his face. He has a beautiful laugh, he said softly. He does, Alara agreed, her voice barely a whisper. She had to ask. She had to know. Was it you? She asked, turning to face him fully. The groceries? The rent? The doctor? He met her gaze, his own steady and sincere. He didn't deny it. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A small gesture, he said, for a profound act of kindness. The confession hung in the air between them, simple and unadorned. Alara felt a fresh wave of tears welling in her eyes, But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us. You have no idea what you've done." "I think I do," he replied, his gaze turning back to the children playing. "You reminded me that there is still good in the world, Alara. You have no idea what that's worth." He introduced himself as Alistair. Just Alistair. He didn't offer any more information, and she didn't press. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the world go by. It was in that quiet moment that a bond began to form, not one of benefactor and recipient, but of two wounded souls finding solace in each other's company. They began meeting at the park regularly. Their conversations were quiet at first, tentative explorations of safe topics. But as the days turned into weeks, the walls they had both built around their hearts began to crumble. One evening, as the amber hue of sunset painted the sky, they sat in the quiet, safe space of Alara's small living room. Leo was asleep in his room, and a soft hush had fallen over the apartment. Alistair was nursing a cup of tea she had made for him, his hands wrapped around the warm mug. He looked at the small, framed photo of Mark on her mantelpiece. "He looks like a kind man," Alistair said, his voice gentle. Alara's eyes glistened. "He was," she said, a tender smile touching her lips. "He was my everything." The silence after he was gone. It was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Sometimes, it's still unbearable. Alistair's gaze was unwavering, his attention so complete that Alara felt truly seen for the first time since Mark's death. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her it would get better. He just listened, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her grief. Then he spoke, his own voice low and raw with unspoken pain. "I know that silence," he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, the same one she had returned to him. He opened it to the hidden flap and showed her the faded photograph of the smiling woman. "This was my wife, Lily," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "It's been 2 years. She was the architect of my life. When she died, the entire structure collapsed. I've just been living in the ruins ever since." He told her about Lily, about her laughter, her passion for art, the way she could make even the most sterile boardroom feel warm. He spoke of their plans, their dreams, all of it turned to dust. He confessed that the day he'd met Alara, he had been at his lowest, wandering the city aimlessly, feeling more like a ghost than a man. Alara listened, her heart aching with a profound empathy. She saw past the man who had saved her and saw a man who was just as broken as she was. She reached out, her hand gently covering his on the table. It was not a romantic gesture, but one of deep, human connection, a shared understanding of loss. "You're not in the ruins anymore, Alistair," she said softly. "You're rebuilding in that quiet, dimly lit room. Over cups of tea and shared tragedies, their souls connected. They were no longer just a virtuous sufferer and a hidden savior. They were two people finding their way back to the light, together." The day of Leo's final major checkup arrived, a day that should have been filled with unadulterated joy. Dr. Eris had declared him fully recovered, his lungs clear and strong. But as Alara stood in the gleaming, polished marble lobby of the hospital, a shadow fell over her. Well, look what we have here." The voice was like acid, dripping with years of cultivated cruelty. Alara froze. She turned slowly to face her late husband's mother, Beatrice Vance. Beatrice was a stately, impeccably dressed woman whose wealth was her armor and her weapon. Her face was a mask of cold disdain, her eyes sweeping over Alara's simple dress with contempt. "I heard my grandson was here," Beatrice said, her voice carrying across the sterile silence of the lobby. "I'm surprised they let someone like you through the doors. I suppose you've found some other poor man to leech off of now that my son is gone." The public humiliation began. Beatrice's voice grew louder, attracting the attention of nurses and other visitors. She accused Alara of being a gold digger, of trapping her son, of being responsible for his death by not being able to afford better care sooner. Each word was a calculated strike, designed to shatter Alara's composure. You do not belong here, she hissed, her face contorted with a vicious sneer. You are nothing but a common waitress who got lucky. I am this boy's grandmother, and I will not have his name sullied by your presence. Alara stood her ground, her body trembling but her gaze unflinching. She would not let this woman diminish her. Not here, not now. You have no right, Beatrice, she said, her voice quiet but firm. You abandoned him. You abandoned us. This only enraged Beatrice further. Security, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. Remove this woman. She is harassing me. Just as two security guards began to approach, a calm, commanding voice cut through the tension. That will not be necessary. Alistair stepped forward, emerging from the corridor leading from Dr. Eris's office. He had been waiting to surprise Alara and Leo with a celebratory lunch. He moved with an effortless authority that made everyone in the lobby, including the guards, stop and stare. He stood beside Alara, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. His presence was a solid, unwavering shield. He was calm but powerful. Beatrice scoffed, looking him up and down. And who are you? She demanded. Her latest victim? Alistair's eyes, which had been so full of warmth for Alara, turned to ice as he fixed his gaze on Beatrice. My name is Alistair Sterling, he said, his voice low but carrying an undeniable weight of power. And this hospital, a wing of which is named the Lily Sterling Pavilion for Pediatric Care, is one of my lesser philanthropic projects. So, in a way, you could say I am the man who signs the paychecks for those guards you were so eager to call. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Beatrice's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as the name registered. Sterling. The Sterling Corporation. One of the wealthiest, most powerful families in the country. She faltered, her arrogance crumbling into disbelief. Alistair's powerful monologue continued, his voice resonating with cold fury. I have had the privilege of getting to know Alara Vance, he declared, his gaze sweeping over the silent crowd before landing back on Beatrice. I have witnessed her character firsthand. I have seen her run into a rainstorm to return a wallet to a man she believed had nothing. I have seen her selfless love for her son. She is the most dignified, honorable, and virtuous woman I have ever met. You, on the other hand, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, are a disgrace to your son's memory. He then turned his attention to Alara, his expression softening into one of profound tenderness. In front of everyone, he publicly offered his protection. Alara and Leo will never want for anything again, he announced, his voice ringing with conviction. They are under my care now. Anyone who attempts to harm or harass them will have to answer to me. The power dynamic was completely reversed. Beatrice was left speechless, her face a mask of shock and utter humiliation. She had been publicly vanquished. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Alistair led a shaken Alara and a blissfully unaware Leo away from the gawking crowd in the lobby. He took them to a quiet, private lounge reserved for hospital benefactors, a serene space with soft lighting and comfortable armchairs. The sterile silence was replaced by a soft hush, a sanctuary from the harshness of the outside world. He settled them in, ordering hot chocolate for Leo and a cup of tea for Alara, his movements calm and reassuring. Once Leo was happily occupied with a coloring book, Alistair turned to Alara, his eyes filled with a raw, tender emotion. He took her trembling hands in his. I'm sorry you had to endure that, he said softly. No one will ever speak to you that way again. I promise. It was then that he laid everything bare. He told her the full truth of who he was, not just a wealthy man, but the CEO of a global empire. He explained that his initial disguise of ordinariness was not a deception, but a reflection of how he felt inside, hollow, anonymous, stripped of purpose by grief. That man in the diner, the weary one, he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. That was the real me for the past 2 years. A ghost. You, Alara, you were the first person who saw a man, not a bank account or a famous name. You didn't want anything from me. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever. Faith in people. He explained how her simple, selfless act had been a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. It had reawakened his heart, giving him a new purpose. The anonymous gifts were his fumbling attempts to repay an unpayable debt, to protect the source of that newfound light. He then made his romantic declaration, a confession that was both grand and deeply intimate. "I have come to realize," he said, his gaze unwavering, his thumbs gently stroking the back of her hands, "that my actions were not just about gratitude. I was falling in love with you, Elara. I am in love with you. You and Leo have brought more light into my life in these past few weeks than I have known in years. You healed a part of me I thought was shattered beyond repair." Elara listened, her heart thudding wildly in her chest. It was a fairy tale too grand to be real. But looking into his sincere, vulnerable eyes, she knew it was true. Her own feelings, which she had suppressed out of fear and disbelief, rose to the surface. She saw not a billionaire savior, but a kind, wounded man who had seen her, truly seen her, at her lowest and had chosen to lift her up. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "I'm falling in love with you too, Alistair," she whispered, her voice cracking. In that quiet room, surrounded by the unspoken promise of a new beginning, they found their resolution. The suffering was over. A new life, one of security and love, was just beginning. 1 year later, the golden sunlight of a perfect autumn afternoon streamed through the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows of a stately home, illuminating a scene of domestic bliss. The cavernous living room, with its ornate furnishings and polished hardwood floors, was filled not with a sterile silence, but with the warm, infectious sound of a child's laughter. Leo, now healthy and vibrant, his cheeks rosy, chased a gleefully barking golden retriever across an expensive rug, his energy boundless. Elara watched from a plush sofa, a book resting forgotten in her lap, her face a portrait of serene happiness. The hollow look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, shimmering contentment. She was no longer the worn, threadbare waitress, but a woman radiant with love and security. Alistair entered the room, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. He had changed as well. The haunted, weary look was gone, replaced by a calm, easy smile that reached his eyes. He set the tray down and sat beside Elara, wrapping a comfortable arm around her. She leaned into his embrace, a perfect fit. They watched Leo play for a moment, a shared, unspoken gratitude passing between them. Their life was idyllic, a perfect blend of peace and joy. On the grand piano in the corner of the room sat 2 silver-framed photographs. One was of Mark, smiling his quiet, gentle smile. The other was of Lily, her eyes sparkling with life. Their pasts were not erased or forgotten, but honored, integrated into the beautiful present they were building together. They were a family, forged not just from love, but from the ashes of shared grief and the profound power of a single, selfless act of kindness. Alistair leaned in and kissed Elara's temple, a tender, sacred gesture. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you," she whispered back. They were home. This story, at its heart, is a fable about the unseen ripples of our actions. It is a testament to the profound, almost magical power of a single act of pure, selfless kindness. In a world that often feels transactional and cold, Elara's choice to run into the storm for a stranger, with no expectation of reward, was a beacon of light. It reminds us that integrity is a form of wealth that cannot be measured in dollars, and that the deepest human connections are forged not in moments of triumph, but in the shared vulnerability of our deepest sorrows. Alistair, a man who had everything and nothing, was saved not by his fortune, but by witnessing an act of grace that reminded him of his own humanity. Their journey from shared grief to shared joy illustrates a universal truth. Sometimes, in saving someone else, we are truly saving ourselves. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the goodness of people, we hope you'll continue to follow our channel. We believe that stories of love, redemption, and unexpected kindness are more than just entertainment. They are nourishment for the soul. In a world filled with noise and cynicism, These narratives serve as a reminder of the light that exists within all of us, waiting for a chance to shine and change a life in ways we can never predict. We invite you to become a part of our community dedicated to spreading positivity and inspiration. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need a story of hope today, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring content. Your support allows us to continue creating these heartwarming stories that celebrate the best of the human spirit. We'll see you in the next one.